Shinji and Warhammer40k. Chapter 44. Tumbling Down. Part 2. Treason. It was the betrayal of one's sworn oaths. There were many reasons why one could choose to commit it, from self-interest, to protect someone else, or to feel that the oath's worthless from having been betrayed first. As humanity itself faced extinction, could it be said that whole nations may commit treason? The convoy was being urged back to Hawaii. It was confounding, since they were already more than 3/4 across the Pacific, but orders were orders. The warships escorting the large nerve freighter were politely insistent. Jason Ostender saw the start of the last war. It began when the UN Navy cruiser Philemon exploded 2 kilometers off to the left of his ship. He was the captain of the modified tanker Helios, and was a Nerve employee. The ship had set out from San Francisco carrying a secret cargo from Nerve Site 6, Boston. As the package had to be transported by rail all the way across the North American continent, he hadn't expected it to remain secret for long. He had, however, been expecting an attack from the Angels. Flashing lights reflected off the ocean surface, briefly competing with the stars themselves. Point defences churned away, and he had to shout even inside his own ship. 6 brightly glowing streaks passed by, and this time a destroyer was doomed.
"What the hell's going on?"
he yelled at his radar operator as he entered the bridge. "Missile attack! We've got ships due north, but the missiles are coming from behind us."
"That's not possible,"
the captain gasped. A sneak attack like that.
"Who are they?"
The Helios was escorted by 6 UN destroyers and 2 cruisers. They were all that could be spared from the tensions in the Far East. Learning from the debacle with the transport of Ava Unit 2, speed was deemed a priority over having sheer number of ships as a deterrent. Unfortunately, this meant that the escort vessels couldn't spread out as a proper screening force. Submarine-launched anti-ship missiles swooped in, and through the violent storm of countermeasures, anti-missile missiles and air defense guns, a few surviving to slam against the other UN cruiser, the Salt Lake. The ship wallowed, trailing thick black smoke. Both cruisers on either side of the Helios were smoking ineffectual hulks, and the freighter captain was just now keenly aware of how exposed they were. He grit his teeth.
"No, they have to be after what we've got in the hold."
He was more surprised the ship hadn't been hit by accident. To a missile, a big floating thing made of metal looked very much like any other big floating metal thing. The radio crackled with, "Helios, we are detecting a laser target designator from your ship. Cease and desist immediately."
"What?"
Then he heard gunshots coming from the door just outside the bridge. Charlie Austin, one of the old handsmen before Nerve bought out the transport company, walked in carrying a submachine gun. "Sorry to bother you, Captain, but we better slow down and stay out of this fight." Behind arrived several soldiers, whose faces were obscured by goggles and balaclavas. A warning shot at the radio operator had the man holding his hands way up in surrender. "I don't want to kill anyone here, unless I have to." Ostender grimaced as he was forced to his knees and handcuffed.
"What's going on? Who are you working for?"
"Someone who wants a miracle to happen, Captain," was the heavy reply. "Someone who doesn't want this world to go all to hell because of people who have too much power and not enough sense." Deep in the hold, the rest of the boarding party checked the priceless cargo. It was a large metal box emblazoned with the red Nerve logo. In white below, it read S2. In the distance, in the centre of the enemy flotilla, was a ship almost the exact duplicate of the Helios.
"Which one do you want to know?"
Kaji asked the last time he'd met with the defence minister.
"The outline of the operation of replenishing mankind? Or the truth of Second Impact? Or the aim of the Angel? Or the relationship between Adam and Lilith and Ava? Or the identity of the men called the Committee? Or that of what we call the Spear? Or the aim of Commander Ikari?"
Then he laughed as he reached into his pocket for a cigarette. At the disapproving look from the old politician, he just put it to his lips unlit.
"Maybe you want to know the plans of young Ikari? Or just what is this treasure box? I'll tell you, but you have to answer a question of my own first."
"Don't worry about it," the minister replied. "Tetrag, won't be harmed when we have to take down Nerve." And all the while thinking it would be best if the woman died accidentally as she resisted protective custody.
"That's not what I want to know. What, you think they wouldn't have thought it possible they'd have to suffer through conventional attack? Or that they won't have someone offering advance warning? No, don't answer. These questions are rhetorical, not what I'm looking for."
Defence Minister Sakata looked sour. The inquest he participated in against the suspiciously apt preparedness of Nerv way back during the Material incident still burned. Through the embarrassment, he felt he was proven right. Nerv and its enemies gave the world a good deal of unnecessary pain. Things just kept on getting worse the more power that Akari, both of them, grasped for themselves. Kaji smirked.
As long as you have a secret, a question will chase after it. I asked Yang the same thing.
Don't be too presumptuous of your own importance. Trying to play both sides at this point will end badly for you.
Kaji took the cigarette from his lips and pointed.
And you'd better take what you see as the truth.
Defence Minister Sakata considered not letting Kaji live to return in Tokyo free, but it was the most basic manoeuvre to ensure one's own unexpected death would just make that much more trouble for everyone else. Kaji's been playing the game for long enough that just a woman didn't sound enough to secure his loyalty.
Alright. What do you really want?
Answer me this, and honestly. What's the door for? Opening or closing?
Huh?
Come on now, this is really important to me. What do you think?
The minister rubbed his head.
I don't have time for this.
Shall I tell you what Yang said? That it's better left to itself. Blocked. Buried even.
Sakata looked up.
Are you talking about the technology of the Ava?
For me, the door should be opened by force. That's the reason. That's why I'm here.
Despite appearances, Nerv was in no power vacuum. With the commander and sub-commander either gone or under arrest, that left Masato Katsuragi as utter despot under Tokyo 3. While Yang's corpse cooled, she was in the next room over, ensuring Tokyo 3 was locked down tight. All roads secured, all flights over the airspace other than the one bringing her back were to be warned away once, then eat an anti-air missile if it refused to comply. Only the AA turrets didn't require resupply, since in the last attack by Ava-class enemies, these fast radar-guided explosive-tipped missiles were just this side of useless. Kaji leaned on a wall, surrounded by armed guards. He had diplomatic credentials, but all knew that he was far less of a target than Masato. He lit up a cigarette and took out his Nerv security pass.
Never noticed before how it's the colour of blood.
Of course his guards made no comment. The security detail was waiting for armoured transport. Kaji had to leave ahead of Masato, since an armoured limo was good enough for him. He was no stranger to death, and seeing Yang's face split open like an overripe melon wouldn't give him, and Masato, any nightmares. What scared him more at that moment was the sheer inevitability of things. He stretched out inside the limo and stuck his hands in his pockets. It was so tiring having to play sides against each other. Maybe even Masato saw him as a fool. Kaji closed his eyes, thinking a short 15-minute nap before having to report into the bureaucracy wasn't too much to ask. He thought back to a few days ago, when he had to meet the Prime Minister himself to explain again how it was foolish to interfere. It looked as if Sakata would be left to hang if his initiative failed to bear fruit. Japan had a lot of leverage ever since the existence of the Geofront was revealed, enough to convince the UN to move the headquarters to Tokyo too. It was a poisoned apple. Didn't they see that? He dug too deep, and what he saw, it would only tempt fools to rush in. He was just so tired of it all. Sleep claimed him easily. He came to inside a dark, featureless steel room. Quickly, Kaji stood up. He wasn't handcuffed or tied down, which was a surprise. He then checked his pockets for his cigarettes. He took out the pack.
Last one left.
Then he realised whoever had kidnapped him had taken the lighter.
Bastards.
The door behind him opened, flooding the room with light. Kaji turned around and smiled.
Yo, I was wondering when you'd show up.
Masato Katsuragi entered and crossed her arms. Two black-suited agents of Nerve Section 2, one tall and tanned and the other shorter and pale with age, flanked her. Kaji wondered if they were there to take over if Masato decided he was being too glib. He felt a flush of approval. Masato shouldn't let herself be ruled by sentiment, unlike a fool like him. I don't need this shit, Kaji, Masato hissed. It's bad enough Gendo makes my mission alive from the start. I don't need my own command staff working behind my back, keeping secrets, as if I'd stomach being protected like that. I just gave Shinji-kun a good scolding about it. I don't want to have to repeat myself. He grinned.
And who do you think you're really protecting?
He put the unlit cigarette on his lips.
There's no way out of this without people getting hurt.
Sorry, miss. But orders are orders. Tokyo 3 is under total lockdown. Nobody goes in or out,
said the eunuch soldier at the pass. This is an abuse of power, Rikazuna screeched from her news van. The public has the right to evacuate from danger zones. This is still Japanese soil, you know. Her faithful assistant sighed and began to reverse the van.
If we didn't try and hunt down Araki, we could have left for the rest of the team.
Katsuragi's not going to get away with this, the reporter yelled out with her head out the window. Katsuragi had given 12 hours for Tokyo 3 to empty itself of non-competence. Then at noon, heavy physical barriers went up over the north and east passes. Metal shutters lowered over the mountain tunnels, and armour slabs rose from the roads. The only way in was through the south, and there, overlooking Cerberus Base, lines of JSSDF tanks straddled the highway. The entrance to Tokyo 3 itself was blocked by the eunuch's fewer but stronger tanks. They faced outwards. General Kiyosato Akira was one of the 3 generals who led the defence against Sachio. While events had later marginalised the role of the JSSDF in defending against the Angels, he'd been one of those very instrumental in getting the UN support base up and running. Now even he was denied access to Hakone. He walked across the empty roads to meet Colonel Nasuno, who was still in charge of the city's defences. Beside him was Captain Avrikopoulos, unarmed and helmetless, though still very dangerous in full tactical dreadnought armour. In his representative, Takita followed, clutching his coat against a strong valley wind. General Akira glanced at the soldiers beyond the pass. Some of the tanks still had the red star of the Chinese, forces brought in some months ago with Akari's return, and then trickling in with the UN's multinational detachments. He nodded to Nasuno.
What do you think you're doing? It's fine if you don't want to leave, but you're edging too close to treason here.
I don't like it either, but those are the orders. You're going to have to find someone who can countermand them.
From Katsuragi?
He sucked his lips in. That would have to be the UN Security Council. Everyone was just waiting for the situation to explode. Unfortunately, if the situation did explode, the nerve to remain neutral would thereafter see them utterly dominating the world stage. General Akira looked back to the sea horizon. China wouldn't survive all-out war, what with their nuclear arsenals just for second strike purposes, at most 100, with about 30 in submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Most of their site-based launchers were used up against the Hakriel. Unfortunately, the Ava had already demonstrated the capability to intercept hypersonic bombardment both globally and simultaneously.
Politics doesn't really interest me, but why is that such a problem?
Spoke Captain Avrikopoulos.
Even I know that no matter how many men the Chinese have, they have no chance of getting across the Sea of Japan.
I don't think even Yang-sensei can pull off miracles when he's dead, said Takita. Not unless they're invited here, Colonel Nasuno replied while rubbing his forehead. If they want to force the issue, it's either that or have a lot of people on both sides die. General Akira nodded. Unless the UN Navy and all other forces there decided to immolate most of the Korean peninsula facing east, the PLA had enough rockets and missiles to kill all the world's naval tonnage twice over and reach all the way across the Sea of Japan. It was a weird sort of mad, since both forces would have enough advance warning of a strike that they could launch their own counter-strikes well in time. But even if the artillery and mobile missile divisions were destroyed, there were still others in transit from the mainland. Yang loved the missile massacre so much. It'd be much harder to replace the ships, and without a force to screen the sea, even the JSSDF's first-line forces entertained the notion they could successfully drive back a mass assault from the mainland. The only reasonably safe platform in the debacle would be the submarines, and the PLAN's submarines were still less capable than the ones available to the UN and the JSSM. The Sea of Japan, however, was so thick with subs and already well monitored that it was nearly impossible to hide. Again, it would rely on whoever decides to strike first. It was a dizzying, complex sequence, and that practically ensured it was not Yang's plan, because they could see it, for all the difficulty of predicting how it would go. Takita smirked. It doesn't really matter, does it? No matter what they do, they only have until Asuka comes back to... How's that go? Fuck their shit up. No one had any doubts about that. The Chinese would be treated to a red-haired devil falling out of the sky, with barbarian rage and a Valkyrie spear, and verily, shit shall be fucked up. Misato put one foot on top of the base commander's table and pumped her fist in the air. I hereby claim this land as the Principality of Katsuragi! Ritsuko hit her on the head with a plastic clipboard. No. All things considered, Futsky supposed, he could be a lot more uncomfortable. He was being held in the JSSDF base at Atsugi. His cell was clean, dry, and spacious. He was fed 3 times a day, and was allowed to keep a pot of tea warm on an electric kettle. He had a small TV to keep from getting too bored, and he could borrow newspapers from the guards. Monitoring was limited to cameras and guards outside his cell. It wasn't how he'd expected to spend his retirement, but better than he felt he deserved. Faster than the screams and explosions began, he was able to restrain himself for looking for more than just a few minutes. With a tired groan, he eventually went over to the small window to his cell. He saw fires, and tanks and trucks overturned, and in the distance, something green and fast roared past. He heard a soft click, and turned around to see Gendo unlocking his cell. I'm surprised you actually even bothered.
You were there at the beginning, Sensei. It only seems proper you see how it ends.
Futsky shook his head and tugged at his grey hairs. So you set her free, I trust?
Just as you wanted.
There was a loud crash from outside. So the exit clause has been nullified. I don't pity Seal, but she wanted you to become an ally of justice. This isn't revenge. This isn't even punishment. He glanced at Gendo's scarred hands. It was never this world that took her from you.
Kitsureki, this is edging very close to treason.
The Prime Minister himself was handling the remote conference. He was still fairly young, with long hair behind a wide forehead.
Hekone is still Japanese soil. Closing it off and refusing to cooperate with investigators. It's suspicious. Is that the image you really want to present?
Misato remained silent, her arms crossed over her chest. She refused to sit on Gendo's old chair. I'm fine with looking like a bad guy if it means nobody gets to take a shot at my pilots. She sniffed. Yang died while I was talking to him. Kaji, back at Cerberus base, chortled.
It's like the classic mystery question, isn't it?
He pointed with his index finger and thumb out, and mouthed, bang.
Who benefits most from the murder?
Kaji, she hissed warningly. I really don't need this shit.
I guess, yes, I do, he replied with a slight grin. But it's not like anyone here in Cerberus respects me anyway. But it's not worth the hassle.
He leaned back on his chair and waved.
But it's unlikely that Yang was killed for transient political power or a casus belli for China. In the short term, this reduces the efficiency of our forces and worsens relations. In the long term, Yang was a relic. It wasn't really him that was the danger, but because he was the best person to hold the treasure box.
What? Prime Minister Sato asked, annoyed at being sidelined.
At the very bottom of Pandora's box, after all the ills and monsters of the world were set loose, was a butterfly of hope.
Kaji bowed his head. In the long term, who would benefit most from Yang's death? Misato Katsuragi. It was time for her to move out of the shadow of the previous generation. The Evangelion isn't going to just go away, Misato replied roughly. We keep on fighting and fighting. What the hell do you think we should get out of this? That left the Prime Minister speechless for quite some time. Then with careful hostility he said, I don't know. There's a lot who believe you want to cause third impact. That's as easy as letting any angel through into terminal dogma, said Ritsuko. She'd been content to remain silent as Misato stonewalled everyone else. As she joined the discussion, everyone connected had to pay attention. She was the world's leading expert on xenobiology, the only one to successfully resist the Unity mindworm, and while Katsuragi could be replaced, Akagi was a prize for any world power. Ritsuko smiled unkindly. How little they knew. Nerve is a UN operation. Well, it's supposed to be. I don't know if Nerve Boston's is free from American interests, but here in Nerve Hakone we can't afford picking and choosing who helps secure that damn angel down below. Why not just destroy it? Prime Minister Sato asked. Nothing in the past 15 years seemed worth all this pain. That might wake it up, Ritsuko replied from her laboratory. That would be a bad thing. What, it's not dead? The creature caused second impact. We do know now that the angels don't seem to have a specific grudge against humanity. They might not even understand why we're so small and yet individuals. It's only a matter of time until we exhaust even the angels. Eventually, their active evolution will imitate our strengths to such an extent that we can communicate with them. The Prime Minister looked doubtful. Are you sure about that? Who the hell do you think you're talking to? Would you prefer to keep on throwing away lives and money and fighting an endless war? If you all want to play with Evangelions in your little political games after this, I don't care. Just don't get in our way until we get this damn thing off the planet.
Misato chimed in with,
Gendo wanted to cause third impact and become a god, you know.
She grinned.
Really, all I'm asking for is to be supplied from whoever I want.
Kaji added, What you do about China's your own business. Anyone trying to take nerve would be trying to control the doomsday trigger, and that would be political suicide. No one should be able to threaten all the world and all of humanity at once.
Yes, that includes us, damn it,
said Misato. We're moving the alien. This is Nerve's actual plan? Where are you going to put it?
Somewhere in deep freeze until we're sure that just throwing it into the sun won't make it return angry and on fire.
Ritsuko's tone was the very pit of boredom, as if daring people to believe she was telling blatant lies. The streets were deserted. Shinji was a little creeped out. It was too similar to his dream. While he knew the people were about a prefecture or two away, he was strangely stuck with nostalgia for the innocent times about a few months previous. There was no need to sneak around. An APC brought him over to the apartment complex, and the guards had to remain outside. Power-armoured people just wouldn't fit through the stairwells. I have to do this by myself, said the boy. This shouldn't take too long. This little apartment. Shinji raised his thumbs to rub at his eyes. It was the one place he felt unlike the tool of some abstract destiny or old conspiracies. That home, with Asuka complaining, Misato laughing, and Rei or Maya dropping in now and then to add a sense of enduring comfort, and Ritsuko trolling them all behind the scenes. Just 1 year, and those were the memories he wanted to keep above all else. While younger, he took comfort in his isolation with the 4 personalities in his head. They weren't enough anymore. He'd cast aside human concerns and conventional morality for power, and now ached for the warmth of mundane living. This city is dying. He had friends growing up at Sendai, but only here and with them did it blossom into magic. I don't want to be alone again. He paused in front of his own room, with Misato's semi-sarcastic scrawl, Shinji's lovely suite, on a hanging board. In his room, Shinji Ikari found a plain white envelope on his bed. Inside was a typed letter from the closest thing he had to a mentor. The old order changeth, giving place to the new, and God fulfills himself in many ways, lest one good custom corrupt the world. If you are reading this, then I have departed well ahead of your own plans. This makes things more difficult for you, and I apologize. But overhauling the world to keep order will not work. In the time of the great Khan, a virgin with a bag of gold may ride from one end of his lands to the other, and both will be unmolested. At his death, both had to travel again under heavy guard. Before you I walked the path of blood, and it's tiring work without any guarantee that the work will last. Yet there are things in this world that need to be fought, and concepts that must be removed from the psyche through force if necessary. I'm writing this with a certain young woman nearby, and hers has been a most enlightening tale, young Ikari. It's heartwarming that you thought of me as your ally. The greatest threat to peace in this world is now you, and for this, Shinji Ikari must die. I know what it is that you fear. You can't run from it anymore. I'm forcing your hand, little prince. It is not power that will let you speak for everyone. It is not violence that is the language all can understand. All is prepared. Show Katsuragi that you've learned my lessons well. This shouldn't have happened, the boy whispered. Yang-sensei, this is unfair. Inwardly he felt a hot flash of guilt, unable to prevent himself from thinking, better him than Misato. Just the thought of it brought his hackles up. He couldn't even begin to imagine the tortures he'd inflicted on whoever would dare to do that. Yang was right. He didn't have a voice, but Shinji was terrified of what it would take to gain it. He'd have to break the pride of nations just to get them to cooperate. The boy sat on the edge of his bed and sighed. He was still in junior high. He'd bought 10, 20, even 100 years of what they needed. The Ava's power was too great to be misused. But he wondered if ever he'd get to go to college and learn a real useful trade. On his study table, 4 figurines were knocked over from all the bustle of the past battles. Shinji looked under the bed and took out a prepared suitcase. There was nothing that he owned that was really all that valuable. He turned back to the figurines. The Farseer,
the war boss, the sorcerer, the captain, just plastic and paint. And silent now. He smiled slightly and bowed before picking them up. Thank you. Everything he'd done has always been with the help of others around him, he remembered. He looked at his own fists. Alone he was nothing. Humanity's frantic need to survive gave him power. He fell back on his bed and laughed. It's not so bad, is it? Living. We can do this. There's still so much suffering in the world, but we can't stop now. There was a knock on the door. Shinji put the figurines in his pocket and opened the screen doors to his room. Oh, Ayanami. Ray stood there in her school uniform. Hadn't Maya dragged the girl off shopping for a new wardrobe several times already? Well, whatever she was comfortable in. Shinji owed Ray far too much to consider anything that would make her even the slightest bit unhappy. Ray stepped into the room and nose to nose with him. Become one with me, said the girl. This is not a good time, he said placatingly. I'm sorry, how about... Ray grabbed both sides of his head and stuck her tongue down his throat. After a few moments, Shinji gave in. Ray always cared. She just had a tendency to go overboard in trying to remove his distress. She bit his tongue. Ah! Ray's eyes were glowing red. The light of your soul calls to me. Let me feed. Let me complete the circle. Shinji blinked. He pulled away. He searched that ever so familiar face. Wait, you're not Ray? He grimaced. There was both timeless hunger and a childlike lack of mercy in her eyes. She was savage and innocent at the same time, pure and beyond right and wrong. Raka? Didn't we speak about how creepy this is? You will be mine again. Shinji narrowed his eyes. Lilith. She smiled widely. Hello again, meekling. The flying fortress Sturmbrand hurried to lift off, even with gaping holes in the hull. Inside, a hastily assembled force, the 2nd and 3rd Unique Heavy Regiments, clung to the handrails, which were ladders when under full thrust. Wilfred Ingram Wolfenbach realised that the Nea Teplin was less of an airship than designed as a spaceship that just had to hug the gravity well. It was the power of the Ava that was providing lift. There was no reason to assume it couldn't be applied straight up. He winced as the Teplin abruptly accelerated. The AT field tugged at their very soul, and through it everyone felt a resonance with the girl at the controls. Her fear and desperation thickened the air. A sonic boom broke the sky over Gulfer. Eurosok had replaced NATO in the CSTO plans, as the threat of overt military action grew ludicrous after impact. There was more focus on Western Europe and its tensions with the frozen UK and France, while the new council managed the resources uncovered by warming Siberia. Germany, by centrality and distance from the coasts, ended up being literally the heart of the new European society. That wealth and connectivity made it nerve centre for research and development, while the American bases were far more suited for production and testing. Wilfred realised he'd grown up in an atmosphere of comfort and optimism. Intuitively, he recognised that Russia had more to worry about with its border with China, and Yang there, while France had to look to the Norman coast. It was so easy to volunteer to head to the east. Like him, he supposed, it felt like paying back the years. Europe was just the second stage. Over there they would fight the angels directly. They could exact revenge upon the aliens. Suddenly, somewhere over Ukrainian airspace, their ride was wrenched aside. Red lights switched on and alarms rang out. Hold up secure! Everyone hold on tight! Someone announced. Prepare for combat manoeuvring! Combat? The soldier next to Wilfred muttered. Are we under attack? Is it an angel? Wilfred grit his teeth. The Teplin was just a big metal cylinder. It had nothing in the way of offensive weapon, except perhaps itself. He let out a delighted ha as he felt everything around him spin and speed up. Of course, Sawyer would just go for ramming speed. Outside was a strange being formed of 2 helixes of bright white light looped around each other. This was the angel Armisael. Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Asuka was screaming. Her voice was coming from the hull of the craft, vibrating in tune to her feelings. Stop singing! Cracking noises travelled through the metal as batteries were forcefully discharged. Inside her own Ava, Mayumi put her hands over her ears. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Get out! Get out! Get out! The front of the Tumbling crackled with strange arcs of electricity. As Castle Sturmbrand pivoted and hurled itself like a dagger, Armisael glowed even brighter, its song now reaching everyone inside. Wilfred growled. He was being pitied. Armisael widened and passed around the Sturmbrand. Then softly the Tumbling vanished, leaving just that eerie, glowing circle. The angel span and shrank until it was no more than hand's width in diameter and spinning furiously. Then it too vanished. Shinji knew his father had Adam implanted into him. Cells and organs needed no awareness of themselves. Even then, Adam was from the start a much less malevolent entity. As he stared into those pitiless red eyes, he remembered why most of the oldest legends spoke of the Titans devouring their children. The world was often made from the dismembered corpse of a primordial god. The boy put his hand on her left butt cheek. "Ooh," she squealed in delight. Then he put his other hand on her right shoulder, and in one quick motion turned her around. A shove put her out the door, then Shinji kicked her in the back to send her overturning the dining table. Shinji forcefully slammed the flimsy screen door shut and put his back against it. "Oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap," he mumbled while sweating in panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. Seal, for all their murderous goals, wanted to avoid this exact scenario. He'd been hoping his experience with a self-aware Lilith was just a hypothermia-induced hallucination. Damn it! He'd been sure Ray could hold her back. As Raka, as his consciousness dominant in her body, he might have just served to erode the barriers. Or a conduit? Shit. Souls could be split. They could be combined. If that dream had any slice of reality, he carried with him a slice of Lilith's soul too, or of his own existence as a Lilith-made creature. Dimly he remembered that Gendo during their negotiations talked about how he'd eventually have to face an enemy he can't beat with an Ava or any amount of trickery. He reached into his pocket to call for help. His cellular phone was in fragments from a mere touch by Lilith. He moaned. The worst primordial terrors were smart primordial terrors. Pen poked his head out of his freezer cabin and briefly locked gazes with the ancient one in Ayanami's shell. She was lying face up, head tilted back. The penguin gave a nervous wobble, slowly sidestepped over to the door, and grabbed at the air. Oh, right, he was too short for the door handle. Hurriedly he grabbed for the umbrellas by the door, but clumsily knocked them all over. He froze at the loud noise he'd made, feeling a red-eyed gaze. The penguin slowly picked up one red umbrella, mindful of Lilith's intent but bored attention. Quickly he pulled at the latch of it, and with his beak pried the door open. Leaving closed it back with a soft click, and then was down the hallway, flippers flapping, as fast as his webbed feet could carry him. He ran, screaming, to the elevator. Lilith slowly got up, relishing the puny fires of pain from mortal nerve endings. Her awareness, sapience even, was limited to the mortal mind she occupied. Ayanami, for all her reticence, still felt the full gamut of human emotions. The pains, the hungers. She was very hungry. She had already devoured the child that was so afraid of turning into a monster. Now, wearing that child's skin, she wanted to taste again that piece of soul that was so different from her own. She flicked some wooden splinters from her skirt and approached the door. "There is no lock," she said loudly, and somewhat amused. It was just a typical Japanese sliding door. "This will not stop me." Beyond the door was a strange grinding noise. Lilith understood love. All-consuming possessiveness was the default state of such a being. Rei Ayanami and Shinji Ikari had screamed from the depths of their soul for power, and she answered. Now the contract need only be fulfilled by the second of the two client creatures. Lilith punched at the door, and much to her surprise, her fist was repulsed by an equally opposing force. Briefly, a large two-headed eagle flashed on the blank white pasteboard screen. Puzzled, she tried again. This time, a strange 8-pointed star absorbed the blow. She understood what it meant to hate, to be denied, to be rejected. Her eyes were misting up, but she didn't know why. Others, like Adam, were in existence that was not her, but sought the same things. She knew of the all-consuming desire to destroy. From the memories inside this shell, she saw it was much the same for little beings. Once more she struck, and a stylized eye flashed into being. It closed, apparently stung. Because she understood hate, Lilith was starting to comprehend an emotion called mild annoyance. She held her fist high and punched with all the force she could muster. The rebounding shockwave blew away all furniture behind her. A winking skull with a jagged, overlarge jaw was there. Its jaw moved up and down as if laughing. Behind the door, the noise had ceased. With a flash of anger, Lilith kicked the door down. The light wooden screen simply disintegrated. She poked her head into the room to see... Her target wasn't around. There was a jagged hole on the side of Shinji's room. From the outside, she heard a door sliding open, and then hurried footsteps. With his mini chainsaw, Shinji had cut his way into Misato's room and entered the veranda. He had 1 foot over the railing already. If Nagisa had just decided to go all out and attack him directly, Shinji knew he had little ability to defend himself. He needed proper tools and preparation, which he'd neglected in the delusion of keeping his home a place of mundane family affairs. He was a pilot, squishy and mortal outside the Evangelion. He'd been counting on Karu's innate sense for the dramatic to keep it level. Even their encounter at Egypt, he had the advantage from knowing the limits of his enemy's power. Damn it! There must be a way we can win! Angels only needed to make contact with Lilith to cause third impact. It was fine, as long as it was secured under terminal dogma. The resources of a world united could support one fortress city near indefinitely. If only Yang had lived. It was too soon to open the treasure box. For the first time, the enemy dictated the terms of the engagement. He needed to recover the initiative. The boy took a deep breath and leapt off. He figured he had about 3 seconds before splattering himself all over the ground. His heart was pounding in panic, but there was no fear about how the wind whistled past and the hard concrete of the apartment's parking lot grew to fill his vision. He spread out his arms and legs to slightly slow his descent, and shouted, Ayanami! Rei Ayanami was undergoing an examination at Nerve's secure medical facility. She was wearing only a shapeless hospital gown. I am confused, she said. Ritsuko didn't bother to look up from her console. Your synchro ratio was never high enough to deliver permanent sympathetic damage. Rei's limit was why Unit 0 required external support to improve performance, instead of just more power reserves for exotic AT field applications. The commander has left us. I should feel betrayed, yet I recognize this feeling, Dr. Akagi. I am sad. I feel lonely. Ritsuko quirked her lips. Like it or not, that man has dominated both our lives for far too long. I am thinking, did he ever really care? Pilot Akari is... Rei lowered her head. But still I hope that not all of what the commander has showed me was a lie. You could just consider yourself lucky instead. Ritsuko held her hand out and one of her mechadendrites slid across her knuckles. I should warn you that your Akari is just as likely to be consumed by his purpose like his father. But you won't care about being used up like that too, wouldn't you? I lived this life for a reason, Dr. Akagi, Rei replied. It is enough. The scientist sighed. Damn it, and here I don't know whether to pity or envy you. Rei quirked her head up, and then her eyes widened slightly. Ikari-kun, she whispered. She crouched slightly and leapt up. Smash! Crash! Boom! Through the floors out the pyramid, a sharp whine spreading out as she cracked the sound barrier within the geofront, then poaching through the primary armor layers of separating the geofront from the city, spilling a fountain of glowing hot liquefied metal as she broke out into the surface. Then braking suddenly, adjusting her AT field so she wouldn't puree someone while catching him in her arms. She had Shinji in a bridal carry. He laughed with mad delight. Instinctively he hugged her and whispered in her ear, I knew you'd save me, he said with a wan grin, playing the role. Of course, she replied. Their trust was absolute. She found nothing funny about the situation. Shinji's face flicked into grim seriousness. We have a problem. I see it. Both looked up to see Lilith balancing herself on the railings of the apartment. With a cocky grin, she threw herself off. The air around her shimmered, and shortly gravity ceased to have any effect upon her. Shinji felt his heart skip briefly, as Lilith pulled on all the souls that bore her mark. All life on Earth. They couldn't see it, but small animals were keeling over, dead, their tiny hearts burst. Birds were dropping from the sky. They both hovered in the air, their AT fields thrumming. Evangelions had power to spare, for all that still weighed thousands of tons and had an extra control step put in. This fine control was possible only for those who had nothing between them and their angelic abilities. The Evangelions were bestial beings of urges and emotions. Here there was just the effort of will, and the world around them. Shinji gulped. Their regions of absolute territory overlapped. There would be no such thing as AT field barriers between these two. No protection but speed. We're different, thought Ray. She instantly zipped back, then up, then to the left, as Lilith swooped with her right hand outstretched like a claw. Ray tightened her grip on Shinji and said, "Hold on to me." Recognising the need for more complex evasive manoeuvres, Shinji locked his fingers together on Ray's hip and nodded. Ray swooped down to skim the ground, weaving around trees. Lilith followed and simply crashed into and through them. Abruptly, Ray turned around, bent her knees and pushed off a tree trunk. She zipped back the other way, passing Lilith. The possessed girl looked back at her quarry and then slammed into the mountainside. "She is angry," Ray said calmly. "Mine!" A voice resonated through the winds. Ray smiled very slightly. Lilith's presence in that shell was very similar to possession, an expression of desire so vast that the world twisted around to make it happen. But for that power, it was ignorant, untrained. Lilith, here, was herself unshackled. Yet it was not Ray that was hurting inside. The girl clutched at her chains of attachment and wouldn't be moved. Lilith thought, "Come here." There was a keen, ululating sound. The blue-haired girls bobbed left, then right, as nearly invisible cutting shards slashed through the air. Ray's AT field flared as trees sent flying up, struck her side, and that was enough to send her spinning. Ray closed her eyes and embraced Shinji tighter. "I will protect," she said to the universe. "He will not fall." She felt Shinji's lips on hers. Surprised, she stopped. Her AT field contracted abruptly. Shinji extended his right hand and Ray's AT field obeyed. They both veered left, then down. Far behind them, a hilltop was clipped out. Shinji bared his teeth. "She doesn't know us." Ray nodded. "We are always stronger together." Ray's AT field shifted in a way only Lilith could perceive. It now held a distinct flavour apart from her own. There was a shriek like a raptor's cry, and 6 gossamer rings of space-time burst out of Ray Ayanami's back, fading back into the black backdrop of blue sky. Shinji pulled free the buttons of his shirt and exposed the medallion he got back at Javal. The eye of Isha was made of psychoreactive material, the very seed for everything else that used them. Like the Geofront itself, it was an alien construct. What was more important was that it was placed into a new titanium casing, one that served as a wireless remote controller. Shinji pushed a button on its back and the side of a hill exploded outwards. There were plenty of buried explosives around Tokyo 3. There were no mere landmines. The explosion launched a wide net made of superconductive wire. Whipping out at speed, it should wrap around any nearby angels and trap entire armoured columns. "Oh, this is bad," the boy whispered as the smoke cleared. There, floating with arms contemptuously crossed, Lilith looked unscathed. Worse yet, the razor web looked undamaged on the valley slope. Either she phased through the material or simply let it pass through, fixing herself immovable in relative space-time and regenerating from all damage as fast as the wires sliced through cloth, flesh and bone. An unseen wave passed over the city, and Shinji grimaced again. His heart felt as if being pulled out of his chest, and he felt cold straight to the marrow. "I am. You are not." There was no arrogance here, only the starving truth. "It is my body," said Ray. Theoretically, even a being such as Lilith should be limited by what the mortal frame could handle. She was only functionally immortal. Ray was keenly familiar in how easily she may be killed. It was blessing. The problem was that Ray wouldn't have survived that attack. It was one of many anti-Evangelion measures sprinkled around the city to bind the berserking god machine. "We need weapons," said Shinji, still with one arm around Ray. He showed no shame about being in distress. He wished he'd indulged in his whims more, for a sword that was on fire would be really useful just then. I'm gonna need both hands free." "I will not let you fall," Ray replied, grim finality. Shinji chuckled lightly. Ray was a very physical person, and expressed herself in deeds. Her words were never just what she wanted to say. "I love you. You know that?" he said, tightening his grip. Ray couldn't help but blush. Shinji adjusted his place to be able to put both arms on either side of Ray's head. Their cheeks were now touching. Ray looked down with a slight smile on her face. "I do." Her AT field weakened, for the light of the soul was bound in the pain of self. Then there was a subtle hum, and gossamer long wings appeared and faded out from her back. Ayanami measured her sense of self and the purpose imposed upon her by others. She rejected all things, all thoughts, all restraint, except for that single, overpowering, absolute terror of being alone again. And in that fear, she moved. Lilith's eyes flashed bright. One moment, 3 very strange teenagers were at a standoff, and then there were 2 overlapping sonic booms. Controlling the AT field of an Evangelion was like trying to harness a hurricane. It wasn't that Ray's AT field was more compliant, but much more focused. Syncing with Ray was very much like syncing with an Eva, only that it was constant and non-invasive. The light of Shinji's own soul may not be as bright as Ray's, but it burned hot. Shinji squeezed his grip, and lightning sparked from behind his eyes. Ray weaved left and right, as Lilith forcefully pulled, drawing everything in a line into a strange vacuum blade. Throwing out her will, it slashed away at the ground. Lilith, for all her power, really didn't know much about using an AT field. Her godlike power was intrinsic and instantaneous. Only a barest fraction of that could be evoked from Ray's physical form. Large area slashes, though barely visible on the move, though devastating to the rain, were doing nothing useful. Ray's own spatial senses could perceive and avoid them. Annoyed, Lilith then held out both her hands, palm out, and hot lines scorched the trees passed by. It was a laser, thankfully not yet homing. Shinji observed it, feeling Ray's AT field like a second skin. He disentangled the mechanisms behind it, and opened his eyes to a flash of new knowledge. He held out the medallion and concentrated. From out the eye came small, quick balls of blue lightning. Lilith twisted sharply and let the rapid-fire plasma balls pass by. Then from either hand flew pulsing jets of raw starfire. The blasts, humming through the air with the crack of cannon fire, blew large craters where they struck. Out from the dust cloud came another bright blue burst in machine gun spread. Boom! Boom! Vip, 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 boom! Vip. It was daytime, and the air duel was only visible by the scars and explosions they left in their wake. Buildings collapsed, streets were torn up, and the shockwaves left by the rapid turn shot through the city with a sound like popping corn. Inside the geofront, Masato was just being asked by the Prime Minister of Japan, "Where is Shinji Ikari?" It was quite suspicious that he wasn't around to be asked if he was willingly participating in Masato's extortion. All Angel alarms lit up. Overlapping danger signs replaced the conference screens. "Majorly strong AT field!" Makoto reported from the command centre. The powers being unleashed couldn't be ignored by mere programming quirks. "It's pattern blue, but there's 2 signals." "Where is it?" "Downtown." He then worked over the feeds. "We don't have video, but there's still sound pickup from the monitoring stations." Not realising the conference link-up was still active, he piped in the data. "I want him inside me," loudly came Ray's voice. Masato's expression froze. "Just for once. Just once. Just let that be exactly what it sounds like." "Sorry, Katsuragi-san." "Ah!" Makoto found an intact monitoring station at an outlying building. "It's Ayanami and Ikari." "And Ayanami?" The readout shifted to familiar patterns. "It's an angel attack!" "Damn it!" It's kind of convenient that Tokyo 3 is empty of civilians just when an angel that's human-sized comes along. The Prime Minister was thinking as he was cut off from the conference. It's just like as Kaji said. The angel attacks are nothing more than a smokescreen. Masato gave no thought to Kaji, who merely bowed aside to watch her work. There was truth in her relief at hearing the boy's voice. It sure made a difference, having something or someone to protect. Kaji looked around at his own battle command deep within Cerberus base. This was Case 0, an attack by a human-sized Evangelion-class enemy. Like Nagisa, or say, Ayanami. Shinji Ikari very nearly wrote the book on anti-angel combat. Certain parties compiled transcripts and offhand remarks and collected them into a small handbook. An uplifting primer, one might say. There was a section discussing why an angel with human awareness and human ruthlessness was the most dangerous enemy of all. Evangelions were all but useless against them. Angel spawn are different. The angel is not a gestalt consciousness, but within its region of absolute territory, it has no problem having whatever form of self it wants. Angel spawn are dangerous, but destroying them has as much harm to the angel as cutting off one's hair for a human. A hybrid like Nagisa, who embraces all the power of his angel half, can strike with all the force of an Evangelion and all the subtlety of a human. And when asked why doesn't Karo Nagisa just attack without having to use the Earth's Cradle, he had this response. Because while it takes an Eva to kill an angel, by wearing the human form, the enemy is as easy to kill as you or me. You just have to get through the AT field. Nagisa doesn't dare attack me head on anymore, because I've proven I can get past his AT field any time to give him a dagger to the face. How could a simple human without any special powers, as Shinji Ikari claimed to be, get through an AT field? Wasn't the whole reason for building the Eva because no conventional weapon could bring down a field? And here the boy laughed. It's strange, but you see, an AT field is the light of the soul. It's the zone of absolute territory where the angel may exist. If you're in one, you feel as if you're being torn apart. There is this great presence that shouts, "You are not!" It erodes the ego border that maintains our existence. It makes you doubt that you have any worth in this universe. It destroys your personality from the inside. It burns and mutates your body from the outside. But through all this I've found, it doesn't take any special gift, no bloodline, no mystical ceremony, no technological aid. It's just that simple. We are all souls self-evident. We can walk through an AT field. It was just surviving the trip that was the problem. Cerberus-based personnel had long resigned themselves to serve as a speed bump to buy enough time to the pilots to get to their Avers. Now that Nerve had no functional waivers, they were faced having to repulse an angel attack on their own. That it was the sort of angel attack they were actually equipped to handle still only brought on a feeling of panic. Colonel Nasuno grudgingly had to applaud Katsuragi's paranoia. With most of the city retracted into the geofront, he had a clear view for his artillery. The VTOLs didn't scramble, their rockets would be useless when their target was small and capable of kicking away at max speed on a whim. The laser air defense towers, however, were active. Deny the enemy the sky, the section on Case 0 said. The AT field could be used to wrap around lasers to split or turn them into homing lasers. We have now access to psychoreactive materials, which have proven corrosive effect on AT fields. There's another anti-angel weapon. I call it the Fort Bomb. Something like it won't destroy the typical giant angel, but against a smaller energy it can destroy its concentration. Anti-air defences can be loaded with psy-cannon shells, and lasers can be focused through crystal impregnated with psychic power to act like a personality beam. As much as the AT field destroys our sense of being, so is it that when we project our own identity on the enemy's region of absolute territory, we also taint it. We can weaken it, eventually to bring the enemy down to the ground where it may be destroyed. As much as a strong enough AT field could distort space-time and serve as super ECM against trying to target it from beyond visual range, not much of a problem as angels tend to be big and conspicuous anyway, it's also a massive beacon to psychic awareness. Much as white noise ECM tends to emit radiation an Arad missile could home in on, warhead seekers could be made to take advantage of how wires of superconductive wraithbone wrinkled to follow or track an AT field emitter. Two targets on the main screen flared their AT fields to repulse crisscrossing fire from automated turrets around the city. The AT field can be used for defense or offense, but not simultaneously, the colonel murmured. But Shinji Ikari, still carried by Rei, could attack anyway. Lightning crackled through the sky, even as the pair swooped for cover. Lilith had no choice but to go lower. Most of Tokyo 3's central business and residential buildings were safe underground. There still remained plenty of freestanding buildings all around the city centre, however, and these were torn through by a pair of glowing blurs. Lilith blasted unhindered through rows of tall tenements until she reached the other end of the city. She floated there, confused. Her quarry had vanished. She looked up, but there was only the bright glare of the sun. The defences hemming her in were annoying, but not enough yet that she deemed it worth it to be distracted from her hunt. While the awakened ancient machine looked around, Rei and Shinji were actually clinging to the side of the second building in. And of course she said AT fields, Shinji sighed as he slumped against the fire escape's railing. Like a shock, Rei agreed. She placed a hand over his. Do not worry. I will protect you. I do have some small amount of masculine No, Shinji sighed again. No, I don't. I can't beat Lilith on my own, not with Unit 1 still locked down. He took a deep breath and pushed off to stand straight. Whatever was necessary to win, pride and strength were but tools to reach the goal. This wasn't the time to play the brash, hot-headed idiot. It was only him that was at risk. You'll have to distract her for a few minutes while I get things ready. Understood. Shinji's eyes widened. I know that tone. This isn't a suicide mission, Ayanami. He grabbed her by the shoulders and put his forehead to hers. Don't do anything too rash. Wait for me, okay? Now would be an appropriate time for a hug, Ray thought. So she did. 2 shall stand, 1 shall fall, she whispered, and then began to glow. With a crack, she was zooming off over the city and towards the surviving point of the defense platforms. She was going to test her body copy's resistance to antimatter. Shinji looked down at 6 floors and wondered if he should have asked her to float him down before leaving. He began to run down, muttering imprecations to contain his panic. He could perform some feats of above-human ability, drawing upon the intangible connections between himself, Ray, and Unit 1, but now he mused that stealth was still the most useful trick. It was why angels just couldn't comprehend that people were actually living, self-contained souls. At best, lava. Souls unable to express themselves were barely living, by their perceptions. Lilith would have as much respect for individuality as one might have to the grains of wheat at harvest time. He heaved for breath when he finally touched down at the alley. He needed to find a payphone or something. He heard a loud screech and something darken at the end of the alley. It was a black car. Tinted windows rolled down, and sunglass-wearing faces showed. "Ah!" greeted Pen from the back seat, the bird leaning out the window. Yes, he too was wearing special custom-fit sunglasses. We've sunk to a new low," said Agent Jiro, taking directions from a damn bird. "Oh, right," Shinji said with an appreciative whistle. "You can track and navigate with AT fields too." Another important difference between Nerve and Cerberus Command was that the latter didn't have the magi to automate most of the necessary processes for command, combat and monitoring. It couldn't operate with a skeleton crew as few as Nerve could. On the other hand, because the military base had more people to throw the problem, it also meant a surplus of low-level flunkies to send on errands. The hot cups of coffee didn't help against this chill everyone felt through their bones. Just earlier, everybody had blanked out. It was like something reached out from behind their brains and wrapped cold hands around their eyeballs. Colonel Nasuno gulped down a hot mouthful. His hands were shaking. For all the jolliness that Tokyo 3 residents treated being constantly on the edge of total annihilation, it was getting too repetitive and too close each time. They hadn't had the time to go into shell shock because the traumatic stress just kept on building and building and building and... He forced himself to focus on present concerns. Ayanami's a clone. Did you know about this? Of course, Kaji replied coolly. The extent of how the dummy plug system relied on Ayanami was known only to a select few in the government, but it was enough to have some people see her as a parallel to Heisenberg's nuclear research under Nazi Germany. The soldier groaned. So now Ayanami's gone rogue. Is there anything Nerve can do about this? Unit 0's missing a head. Unit 1's missing both arms. Masato spoke from the main screen of Cerberus Command Bunker. We're lucky Ayanami's still fighting on our side. But in another sense, Ayanami has gone rogue, Ritsuko put in. Well, care to explain that? Masato tilted her head down to ask. She was standing up in the commander's station, but unwilling to sit down in Gendo's seat. She wasn't directly involved in the fighting. She felt the least she owed her children was to stand and face the danger with them. No, I have no explanation, Ritsuko replied. She was sitting far more relaxed, her ahogi swaying from side to side. I just know Pilot Akari has something to do with this. There was a chuckle from behind as the door to the unit command center opened to let in Shiro Takita and Kensuke Ada. Kaji raised his right eyebrow inquisitively. With the land dreadnought just as useless as the Evangelions, he wondered why they still stuck around. Nerve doesn't have the forces to deal with this, but we do, said Takita. We're the support base for Legio Terminatus too. We just saw them in the Saikana set out. Kensuke nodded. Shinji told me about Case Zero, just in case Tokyo 3 goes silent. I think he was hoping I'd evacuate too, but what the hell? He looked up at the screen. I wonder why the Angel. Why is it fighting outside instead of heading down to the Geofront like usual? Ada could consistently be counted on to focus on his martial obsessions. Where most people would be worried about dying, Kaji mused that Kensuke would worry about how it wouldn't be a cool enough end. The boy's words sapped some of the tension from the command center. Kaji could see some of the operators ease their shoulders slightly. There was still this formless terror weighing them all down, more than the usual near panic of an angel attack. They had to laugh at danger, otherwise they might give in to the urge to curl up and cry. Kaji looked around. If they managed to survive this latest doomed enterprise, he knew these brave fools had one more test to endure. The tools that Nerve required to win, the Ava, the Lance, they had none of those things now. K0 was just the hope that human half measures would suffice. He envied being able to trust in something or someone that deeply. The communications to Nerve fizzled for a moment as a large explosion rocked the surface. One of the ammunition buildings went up in flames.
Hang on. Captain Raggy-san, we've got contact,
Shigeru's voice broke in.
It's Shinji.
Up on the overhead tactical displays, another armament building winked out of existence. A few moments later, however, they managed to get another signal. A battered, vintage black automobile screeched as it bounced off a fallen lamppost. Shinji had on a headset connected to the heavily modified radio on the dashboard. He was belted in. Beside him sat Pen, likewise wearing a seatbelt too loose for his tiny avian body. The bird screeched in protest. In a voice all too calm, Shinji said, "You're the one with an AT field for no readily explicable reason. You make sure we don't fall wheels up and get crushed to death." Pen let out an irritated trill and tried to cross his wings. The car landed wheels down and bouncing back up hard, its suspension nearly cracking. Agent Jiro fought to get the reels moving again. He licked at a chipped tooth and adjusted some buttons on the dashboard. There were different flavours of the AT field, and only a few served as a natural ECM. Unfortunately, most shielding effects fell under this heading. After a while, there was a crackle and a steady buzz.
"We got a lick to the geofront," the agent said. "Nerve, this is Section 2 Unit Sigma 3. Stand by for communications with pilot to carry."
"Shinji!" Masato shouted while putting both palms on the commander's table. "Where are you? Are you alright?" "Hello? Oh, excuse me, Masato-san." There was a loud shriek of skidding tyres. The link faltered for a few seconds as Pen's mediocre field repelled a falling girder. "Ugh! I'm fine." "Situation report!" Shinji took a deep breath. Masato was in her uncompromising command mode. Plans and possibilities danced within the boy's skull. This was explicitly the worst thing ever. To survive. Somehow Masato must be persuaded to deliberately try and trigger third impact. His father choosing to go away from Nagisa. Was this yet another of Gendo's scenarios? "We're under attack. One of Ayanami's other bodies has been compromised. But it's a power-type enemy instead of an infiltration or infestation type, so defeating this one should prevent the others from activating. It's the second angel." "What? What the hell did you do, Ikari?" Ritsuko's voice cut in suddenly. Sorry, there's... Ah! Pen squawked suddenly in alarm. "Can we talk about this later?" "Explain yourself or face my wrath!" Shinji sighed. He could feel a tingle at the back of his neck telling him that once again either Lilith or Ayanami was nearby. Communication was cut off. The front of the car separated from the rear half, the boy and his penguin grimacing as sparks flew below their feet as the metal frame scoured against concrete. The front with the engine continued for a while longer before sliding to a stop. Little slivers burned Shinji's shins. Hurriedly, he pushed the release button for his seatbelt. He fell forward onto the street, and Pen obligingly slid out of his own seatbelt and onto the boy's back. The bird let out a frantic warning. A shadow passed over them. Shinji had no time to get up and run. He rolled across the pavement, while Pen scampered in place above him like riding a rolling log. Whoomp! The rear half of the sedan was flattened by the tangled wreck of billboard frame. Shinji discerned a warm light from the corner of his vision. Painfully, he tried to get back to his feet. He looked up to see the two Section 2 agents get out of the front half of their vehicle, ineffectually firing their pistols at Lilith's AT field. Fortunately, Ray intercepted the wave of force that would have turned the agents into meat paste. A heavy blanket of fear hung over the city. Shinji forced his way through it with sheer hate. Lilith had a bored expression on her face, but it was different from Kaoru's arrogance. Feral madness glittered in her eyes. She was a broken creature, made of jagged pieces that didn't quite fit, and what she wanted were souls to jam into the cracks. That expression didn't belong on Ray's face. How dare this being defile Ayanami's existence? Shinji wondered if this was indeed the slumbering god held captive within the geofront, or a dead echo from a dead world. A dim part of him noted how perfect it was. Ray Ayanami, who could renew herself, could shed mortal shells like a serpent may shed its skin, should now hold the primordial beast that sculpted worlds and carried the law with her teeth. Ray nodded. Go. She was radiant. She was almost smiling, content and fulfilled in her purpose. And yet, even with all her powers unsealed, it was still an unequal battle. It was just skill and experience that carried her, and her heart wasn't immune to the fear of Lilith's unmatched potential. If Lilith had his and Ray's memory, she'd know about Case Zero. Shinji was bait. On the other hand, Lilith couldn't focus completely on fighting against Ray, as long as she was made to worry he would get a Ray. Lightning crackled in the space between Shinji's fingers, but he had no choice. Indirectly, he was helping Ray more by being nowhere near her. Shinji let out a soundless snarl and turned away. He ran, carrying Pen under his arm like a football. There were tunnels all over Tokyo 3. He saw the agents were already opening a hatch. It was a calculated risk, he saw. Lilith wouldn't be able to find them so easily, but neither would she have any problem punching through the street level to corner them underground. They would be as helpless as a rat in the path of a pipe cleaner with a head of spinning blades. There was only dim red light to see with within the claustrophobia-inducing tunnel. There was another benefit to going underground, however. Agent Jiro forced open one of the maintenance lockers to take out a hardened radio that could tap into the underground communication lines. Unfortunately, this link wouldn't be as encrypted as that from the Section 2 radio transceiver. Nerve Command, this is Akari. Are you tracking us?
Yes, we can see you, Shinji, Mai replied. That's the access tunnel M5. There's an intersection leading north and south ahead.
Where are the Psycana deploying?
We can guide them over to your position, but the main road to Cerberus base is to the south.
Akari, I haven't forgotten, Ritsuko cut in again. You still owe me an explanation. Shinji sighed. He'd have to explain on the move. Fine. Ray told me she could feel always the presence of the angel from whose genetic information she was designed. That thing the committee calls Lilith. Nagisa keeps calling us humans as Lilim, remember? That creature's also the source of all life on this planet. Ever since First Impact, after billions of years, the second angel chooses now to wake up? Adam's release during Second Impact should have done something. How curious. It wasn't like Lilith was dead, otherwise they'd never have been able to grow the Evangelions. Don't tell me. This whole mess. You woke the damn thing up, didn't you? I'm not sure. What I did really shouldn't have an effect like this. Father had the lance. He was waiting at Terminal Dogma. I don't know if he did something before leaving with Nagisa, or if it really was, as he feared, that a malevolent force followed him across dimensions. There was a long pause as the tactical map showed Shinji and two others were making use of a sewer access. It may be smellier, but also wider, and thus they could move faster. The sewers needed to be large to funnel floodwaters out of the city. Such a paranoid measure had proved insufficient when the city did end up being flooded anyway. But better than nothing. Unlike the maintenance access tunnel, it was dark inside the sewer outflow tunnel. Agents J and K put on slightly goofy-looking LED flashlights on headband. Agent Jiro couldn't help but mutter it was the perfect time for some sort of crawling alien terror to appear. Stop! Shinji yelled and pulled hard on the agent's collar. Don't move! What is it? What is it? Oh god, it's a xenomorph, isn't it? They were all thrown back as the tunnel in front of them collapsed inwards, and choking heated air filled the confines. Up on Nerve's tactical map, an entire city block vanished. Rei Ayanami leaned against the TV tower, breathing heavily. My body is mortal, she whispered. That was the whole rationale behind Case Zero. While she could use the AT field like the Evangelion, unlike the God Machine, she burned calories with every movement. Eventually, even Lilith in her shell must tire. A few more of those wasteful, cross-shaped energy blasts? Ray grit her teeth and pushed with her bare feet off the metal frame. The steel buckled inwards, and she shot off with a mumbled, Here he goes again. Agent Jiro popped his head out a manhole and let out a girlish scream as a tyre just narrowly stopped in front of his face. It was connected to a white news van. He climbed out and rested on the road, with a hand to his chest. It was bad enough there was a terror aura pressing down on everyone in the city, but a few more shocks like that and he'd get a heart attack. Meanwhile, his partner wasted no time in commandeering the vehicle. Shinji! Masato gushed, relieved, as the boy turned his radio back on. The tactical display showed his beacon moving at a good clip south. Good. Listen, the forces from Cerberus base are already set up at 1659er. Get there as soon as you can. I'm raising some more armament buildings to cover you. Our system still can't discern which AT field sources Ayanami and which is the angel, Katsuragi-san, Makoto said in a tone he hoped didn't sound insubordinate or second-guessing her orders. Use the manual override and get some gunners to aim at the things. Understood. Switching control over to the secondary command platform. Makoto began speaking to the operators below the bridge-like command tower. Raise barriers! Thick slabs of composite material rose from street level to block the way. Designed as shields for the Ava, its ablative surfaces rated against what energies angels were expected to unleash, Misato hoped it would still trap or delay the human-sized enemy. She was finding it a personal surprise that despite having gained some emotional attachment to the blue-haired girl with her own subtle brand of humour, Misato was having no problem thinking of Rei as just another angel to be destroyed. Had it really been just a few hours since she felt so sickened by what Ritsuko was doing with the dummy plug project? Speaking of the doctor, Akagi had once again seized upon Shinji's inability to elucidate properly. Just because he was fleeing for his life was no excuse. Akari, if Lilith is self-aware, then because we're not dead yet, it can only mean that it has self but no body. I already know you're insane. What idiocy is this to send Ayanami out to fight that thing? She might trigger impact in contact with it. That's actually the least of our problems. Ayanami's formed from the genetic material of the second angel, but I never liked how people can be made to hate her unfairly or want her as a tool to use for self-extinction. We can't win this war unless we're free from that risk. Ritsuko scoffed. So to preserve her from further experimentation and exploitation, tell me now, what did you do? There was a long, uncomfortable silence through the channel, broken only by distant grinding sounds as downtown buildings were torn apart. Ikari? We kind of removed Rei's ability to trigger impact? How? I can see you're not in danger or out of signal range. Answer the damn question. I can synchronize with Rei like an Evangelion, alright? We duplicated Mother's contact experiment, and I transferred that piece of her soul into myself. He let out the part of it being done by accident, and possibly from tearing his way out of some other timeline or universe. And done only via Lilith's own consent. As a human, that would just kill me long before the process can complete. Ritsuko groaned and bit her cigarette in half. What is this? I don't even... Misato slapped her palms on the table. Shinji, that is unbelievably stupid. Why would you even do that? Other than the obvious reason, she supposed. Young idiots in love. Cloning me would be useless, Shinji replied all too evenly. So if humanity ever needs the Avas in the future, the dummy plug system would still function. But if we get rid of the first and second angels, we won't have to worry about an impact event ever again. But if you can... This isn't good, Shinji. You're just asking to get a bullet to the brain. Misato grit her teeth. This sort of grand self-sacrifice was an insult. She hated that obsessive sort of selflessness from her father, and it was hypocritical to see it from Shinji. Seriously, if you say you think it's a fair trade, I'll hit you when you get back. The screen fuzzed out for a moment as the containment systems for a positron cannon ruptured, unleashing a flare of antimatter annihilation into the air. Shinji! Misato gasped as the locator signal vanished. This was very different from sending the children out to fight inside an Ava. When the static cleared, everyone was relieved to see Shinji's radio beacon moving a good clip south. A camera on the far end of the avenue caught a glimpse of a white news van. In a strained voice, Shinji finished with, We'll have to deal with it anyway. Sorry, Misato-san. Misato shrugged. They're already used to cleaning up other people's problems. Ritsuko, options? All our previous scenarios involved delaying action just to get the pilots to their Evangelions. But we have no functional Evangelions. The enemy is too agile or too small for many of our remote weapons. Ayanami is doing surprisingly well. Anything strong enough to take out the enemy is likely to kill her as well. I'm not shoving every N2 mine we have up to the surface, Ritsuko. That boy of yours made himself the target. Stupid martyr tendencies. Like it matters. Someone still has to die. At a peeved look from Maya, Ritsuko relented. There are more exotic methods out there. Methods that were never under Nerve's control. Shinji Ikari brought in an army. The problem was that a full unleashed Rei, as an angel, could devour whole armies and everyone knew it. Getting her so unflinchingly loyal to him, that was a cunning move. Ritsuko smirked. Whatever words the boy might use to justify it to himself, he was a user like his father. He just took better care of his tools. Agent Giro spun the wheel and sent the white news van into a sharp turn. The cameraman / driver / flunky shielded Rika Azuna with his own body. "Hey, careful with the Ugh!" he tried to say, as Rika, in trying to get up, dug her elbow into the small of his back. Agent Kentaro grabbed Shinji by the back of his shirt before the boy could accidentally faceplant into the reporter's breasts. Shinji didn't even seem to notice, his attention consumed by the military radio held up to his ears. "Turn left to the next intersection. They're ready," he said, opening his eyes to see Rika Azuna's outraged expression. His own face showed confusion. She was about to slap him, but missed from her cameraman moving out from under her. Just as well, since Agent Kentaro, despite his dark shades, radiated hostility at trying to punish the kid for a perversion he hadn't even done. Or it could be that the boy reminded him too much of his own younger days and strong-willed women that dominated his teenage years. The new van's roof caved inward, and the rear door was ripped right off. Flipping head over heels, a blue-haired girl slid into the van. Rika screamed at seeing Ray's fell grin, her eyes glowing like hellfire. "Stay back! Oh! Shinji yelled brokenly. Quickly he fumbled behind him looking for any weapon. His fingers found something soft and he pulled. "Ah!" said Pen Pen. The bird saw it was face to face with Lilith and began to scream in panic. "Behold my penguin laser!" Shinji yelled with his eyes tightly closed. "Ah!" said Pen Pen. "What?" said Lilith. Shinji squeezed the side of Pen Pen's belly, and the penguin's eyes glittered bright. A cross-shaped flash burst out, clipping the hairs just above Lilith's ears and blowing off a skyscraper's top in the distance. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched within the vehicle, interrupted only with the clanking of the motor and short bumps as the van rolled over the broken highway. In my defence, I wasn't expecting that to work, at all. The boy whimpered. Pen Pen spun around in Shinji's hold and began to viciously assault the boy's face with his claws and feet. As Shinji let out a of pain and let go to protect himself, Pen Pen dropped to the floor and, giving a last contemptuous sniff, waddled over towards the front of the vehicle. There was a whoomp as the second set of footprints appeared on the van roof, and a slim arm reached down to grab Lilith by the hairs at the back of her head. As quick as she appeared, she was gone. "Wasn't that Ayanami?" asked the cameraman. Again, they all had to look for support as the van skidded into another sharp turn. As the van rounded the corner, it passed the line of large armoured mercenaries, the Legio Terminatus, all 16 of them. Wraithbone was horrendously expensive. Psychically charged material, however, was apparently almost the same thing as the Lance and could break through passive AT field protection. The Legio Terminatus, 12 armed with cut-down anti-tank autocannons, were burning through about $300 million worth of side cannon rounds per second. All that just to keep Lilith pinned down. If her AT field was focused on the fence, it wasn't being used to tear to shreds everything in sight. Overlapping hexagons flared all around her, and she had to drop to the ground. Above her, on the roofs of either side, were the Psychana. Lama Pagnor was there, in full Terminator armour, and with the experimental psychic hood. The rest of them were wearing lighter armour, but still with the strange tall helmet. They were all wielding spears of black metal. A third of the city was rubble. Half the rubble was on fire. Shinji winced at feeling 3 broken ribs. His elbows were scraped and bleeding. He was grinning. Ayanami was worth an army. But what about Ayanami plus an army? The white van lurched to a stop, and slowly those inside got off. A penguin hopped out of the front side seat and began to berate the driver in unintelligible squawks. Agent Jiro shot a wild, "Help me, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here," look to his partner. They were supposed to be Shinji's sentries, kept a comfortable distance away from his zone of weirdness. "What's happening?" Rika Azuna asked while jabbing at her companion to get his camera up. "I heard part of your conversation with Katsuragi. You seem to know a lot about this latest angel attack Pilot Akari. What is Lilith? What was that thing about removing Ayanami's ability to trigger impact and implanting it into yourself?" By the gods, just when she thought any Akari's power-grubbing ways couldn't surprise her anymore, they just go several more shameless steps beyond. Agent Kentaro stepped between the reporter and the boy. "No comment." He put his hand over the camera lens. "Thank you for your patience while we commandeered your vehicle, but now it's best if you left. It's dangerous here." The reporter mullishly stuck her jaw out. "No, I'm not afraid of you," she said while holding her microphone like it was a dagger. "I'm not afraid to chase after the truth."
"That's brave of you." Kentaro lifted an eyebrow. "But stupid."
"You fascist asshole!" "No, just one 20-kiloton N2 device isn't enough," Shinji said into his radio. "It's going to take at least 10 megatons to overwhelm Ray's AT field, and timing all those N2 mines is going to be tricky." He blinked. "Yes, I want to preserve the city. No, we're fine. Just bring them to the surface, please."
"Wait, did he just say what I think I heard he said?"
the reporter asked shrilly. Agent Kentaro pointedly looked past her.
"Maybe you'd better turn that camera around. We all have to fight for survival in our own way. The truth also contains what people give of themselves."
Shinji Kari smiled thinly. From an armament building, a metal box shot out and landed close by. The box opened with a steaming hiss, exposing a Mark III armoured plug suit. Now he could fight. After all, Kara Nagisa could do everything that Ray could. K-0 relied heavily on his experience fighting Karu hand-to-hand in the desert of Sinai. The MK3 Mark armoured suit, instead of a full body suit, was instead separated into pieces for the chest, arms, thighs and knee-high boots. Armoured joint covers vents over his knees and elbows. With a thought, wraith bone fibres grew, linking plates together. Shinji took out the strange eye-shaped medallion he was given at Javal. Its secrets were uncovered in his Egyptian expedition. They called it the Stone of Kings. He slid it over the belt buckle of his plug suit, incidentally over the chakra point over the groin. He'd won a Ray long enough.
"So, this is how it ends,"
said Pagner. He'd lived a long time, like most of the masters of Javal, eating the pain of the living world. He'd always known the hatred from the colour of one's skin, or the faith held by one's fathers made no sense. But it was still odd to have all of man's old grudges put to stark insignificance by one strange blue-haired young girl. All the wars men fought was for nothing. All the power men claimed was for nothing. This was a war that could only be fought and won inside the heart. He looked to his left and right. These were the warriors made for final war, prophesied over 5,000 years ago. When he first learned of his own abilities, contacted in the streets of Chicago in 1938, he'd been hateful at being prevented from using his powers to make change, to make them all pay. The fool society broke his illusions of people of his abilities being any more moral or worthy to rule. He'd been brought to Javal for training, and fought in the scarred wastelands created by the sacrifice of millions, in worlds half-formed and in the shadows behind men's eyes. But it was just one piece of the puzzle. A greater horror lay in wait. To seal the war was just an excuse. The Japanese imperial government had opened up the geofront and thought they could use the dead monsters within as their trump card. The metal wasted for the battleships Yamato and Musashi was nothing compared to those sunk underground. It would have been a fortress beyond anything the world had known, a city in darkness, an empire in secret. That was the last counter-invasion plan. A shadow moon, untouchable, slid sideways in time where one may counterattack with impunity. Seal had no need for Imperial Japan. They needed the secret broken, the Allied powers in excited frenzy at this power beyond their atomic weapons, pouring more funding into research that must be hidden from the rest of the world. But the victorious mood shouldn't be broken by the proof of man's insignificance in the universe. To more subtly and inevitably nudge the powers behind nations into the ultimate blasphemy. There had always been monsters in the shape of man. "The temptation is too much," Shinji had said. "The dummy plug system sounds like a mercy, or at least efficient, compared to having pilots like me, but it's still a trap. I wonder how many worlds before us were consumed by tainted self-interest."
"Are you saying that man's shape is not unique in the universe?"
"I'm saying it's inevitable. Where'd the story come from, I wonder, of the undying mother who rears her daughters' faces?" Pagner took a deep breath, lightning sparking around his face like a blue halo. He slammed his helmet over his head and growled. He lifted his spear and jumped off, running down the side of the building in defiance of gravity. It would end here. The others followed without hesitation. The world had changed around them. It was as if in the distant past someone had cut a sliver out of time just to make sure there were those who could stand at the right moment. Mortals with the power to slay a god. And then there was lightning. Lama Pagnor looked down to see Shinji Ikari had finally joined the fray. Physically, the boy was weak, and to try and wrestle with the Chaos Serpent would only get him snapped like a twig. When above, the heavens did not yet exist, nor the earth below. Apsu, the freshwater ocean, was there. The first, the begetter, and Tiamat, the saltwater sea, she who bore them all. They were mixing their waters. Adam and Lilith, Apsu and Tiamat. Well, it was sufficient to think of this as a reflection of the civilizations arising on the banks of a great river emptying out into the ocean, where both farming and fishing provided freedom from hunger. There were also strange symbols hidden in the memories of man. Water, the Dead Sea Scrolls that contained the writings of a long-dead ancient race said, had always been the metaphor for life. Fire had always been the reference to intelligence. The first angel Adam was rendered dormant by Lilith's arrival, and yet so was Lilith exhausted by the struggle that the life that emerged was not yet a copy of herself. But it was inevitable. The Dead Sea Scrolls were sections of the Tablets of Destiny, and whoever possessed Dop Shemati was supposedly ruler of the universe. The Tree of Life needed the light of intelligence to bear fruit. "We were born to no purpose," the boy had said with a laugh. "How arrogant it is to think we're the ultimate form of life in the universe, when two gods sleep with us. And these beings of near-omnipotent cosmic powers were created as mere gardeners." Psychers had no explanation for how the hell Shinji Ikari could do the things he did. The closest that anyone could get was that he had a mass passive synchronization with Unit 1 going on all the time. While Psychers could impregnate psychoreactive materials with energy, Shinji could only drain it. But he could do it swiftly, explosively, and somehow not die. Wearing a suit of superconductors only made it easier for him to will electrons out of the air and into punching lightning out of his fists. Seriously, he thought, what the hell is up with that kid and being so attuned to lightning? Shinji's palm slapped onto the stiff surface of an AT field. Lightning crackled inside the field towards the one creating it. Lilith pulsed the field, throwing off both Shinji and Rei in a shockwave, and in dropping the field narrowly avoided being flash-fried. The region of absolute territory was not absolute where he was around. There was no terror that could hold him. "There's a collective unconsciousness that links together all of humanity. Those who can pull power out of that wellspring is the Golden Saint phenomenon," the warrior priest pondered. But the boy was no goddamn saint either. Chimera tanks with 110mm cannons pumped out high explosive rounds at Lilith, forcing her to raise her AT field again. While the attack would do no damage whatsoever, the more she used it, the more she would tire out. Her presence filled the air. Her demented laughter scratched at the insides of everyone's skulls. Nagisa, like all the Ava pilots, could enjoy combat, the artistry of those who clashed in personal battle. This enemy didn't lust for the confirmation of one's own power and existence, as Kaoru indulged in. There was only hunger. Slowly she walked forward, uncaring of the hot flashes continually battering her shield. She bared her teeth and leapt. The glacis of a tank caved inward, and the driver was pulled out screaming. She drank of his terror. Corporal Hideaki Toba, aged 20, had a girlfriend who he was afraid was seeing someone else due to his reluctance to propose and the danger of being assigned to Tokyo Free. His name, his past, his hopes and his dreams, her red eyes pulled out the kernel of his identity. The soldier screamed as his flesh bubbled and broke open into bloody sores under an intensely strong AT field. The ego border collapsed and he exploded into a gout of blood. Blood which drained off the strained tank hull and into her shadow. Aside from the empty uniform, it was as if he'd never existed. Lilith frowned. It wasn't enough. The void inside of her just ached more from having tasted the bounty. "We too are tenders," Shinji Ikari had said, in a planning session with the Psychana and over his father's own copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls. "We are but leaves in the tree of life, and eventually, we were meant to be consumed." Superconductive wires lashed out like the heads of a hydra, spinning together into threads, then a rod, then a staff. Lightning blasted across Lilith's side, and with a grimace she forced the mortal shell to endure. She thickened her defensive field considerably on that side, and turned with a look of annoyance. At the other end of the street, Shinji's face was set in defiant snarl on return. He shone with the hopes of billions. That should sate some of her hunger. There was just enough time to react, to take the premonition and turn to get Rei Ayanami's fist in her gut. Then a jab to her throat, and while Lilith didn't need to breathe, the flush of pain disoriented her anyway. She flailed her arms out to keep balance and was caught. Rei Ayanami pulled at her opponent's arms, her knees on her doppelganger's back. The power behind their punches was an explosive release of the field. Leverage still applied, and with such a pin, not even a being of Lilith's power could do anything with her shell in such a pose, as if crucified. She could only be forced to watch as, like host of descending golden raptors, the Cicada descended in the culmination of Case Zero. Their spears crackled with power, the 80 field blazed red and was pierced through. There was just a staccato of heavy thuds as they drove their spears down with both arms and all their strength. The pavement cracked under their boots. There was the scent of burning meat as 8 long spears impaled deep into Ayanami's body and out the back. Ray just gave a slight wince as the blades all but penetrated to make shallow stabs into her own flesh. Steaming blood dripped down the blade coming out of Lilith's neck and stained her pale green hospital dress. Lilith let out a strange gurgling noise. The primordial being was trying to laugh, even as her lungs filled with blood. Shakily she reached out to grasp a grim, scowling helm of the Cicana. Gently she cut the long chin and spluttered, "And now, the gift is all mine." She threw her head back, the heavy spear straight through her eye, breaking her neck. As invisible waves spread out, pulling out dread and despair from everyone. It soaked down through the ground and forced those in the geofront to hug themselves. It slid through the air to the sea, and the warships in Sagami Bay looked towards the city in horrified realization. The heartbeat of the world seemed to skip, and those asleep on the other side of the world woke screaming. Mankind, in all the billions, shared a vision of a murky, dark sea, and from its still waters 2 needle points began to rise. The 2-pronged spear met in a long, coiled shaft. Something in the depths of their souls wanted to burst out, hurting and alone, and out there was something that wanted to end their pain. Blood burst out of the neck of the armoured form she was touching. The mailed suit flopped wet and empty onto the road. Lama Pagnor winced and managed to push back, letting go of his spear. Others, too slow, were dragged in as their spears were sucked into Lilith's torn flesh. Ray's skin began to flake off. She grimaced in pain but refused to let go. A cross-shaped blast rose high over the cityscape.
Is it self-destruction?
Masato asked through the tense silence that permeated the command centre. There was high droning noise and the sensors went wild.
"Blue pattern detected!"
Shigeru shouted.
It's an angel!"
"Oh, come on!" Masato snarled. "Can't we catch a break?" High above Tokyo 3, a spot in the sky grew bright, then abruptly shattered outwards. Threads of energy shot out like from a broken loom, weaving together into the counter-rotating helix that was Armisael. The angel swung in mid-air, letting out a hard twanging noise to hover above the place where Lilith lay. Ritsuko had a brief flash of panic. The second angel was out of the geofront. Contact between it and an angel born of Adam would cause runaway third impact. She held her breath and steeled herself to watch the world end. The empty space within Armisael's rings flared bright, and a bright red-hot pillar of raw starfire lanced down. It had nothing but hatred for the very idea of Lilith. The shock of the beam caused the air around it to burst out in a shockwave, sending cars tumbling over and into buildings. The particle beam pulsed continuously, but impossibly was deflected. The beam blasted down at an angle into the geofront, effortlessly burning through layers of earth and armour to scar the green fields beneath. Monitors fizzed out into static, and the ground shuttered. There was flame, and there was smoke, and there was silence. Ayanami crawled. Her elbows and knees were scraped raw, and half her face was covered by blood. Slowly she moved by shifting on her side, snake-like, pushing with her thighs. Her only thought was to see Shinji safe. He wasn't born to this power, and thus she thought it only fitting that only she should suffer. Her strength was his, and his own strength was the one that kept her living. "Ayanami!" She smiled. He too was on his knees, coughing, trying to find his way through the dust cloud. She knew in her heart that if they were to just touch, everything forever would be all right. They were like broken mirrors whose jagged pieces fit perfectly. Shinji had never really healed any of Ray's issues with her self-work. They had channeled it into more productive purpose. Ray couldn't bring life onto the world. Thus she had to be the preserver. Behind her came the light clacking of footsteps, the concrete screaming where shoes touched. Ray flinched. She saw Shinji gasp in wonder, and she regretted having been unable to spare him this pain. The floating cloud of debris burst, clearing away right and left as if blown away by the flapping of great wings. The white of a laboratory coat shone eye-hurtingly white. Yu Ikari smiled. Who, after all, could have told Gendo Ikari it was possible for a mere human to claim the powers of a god, to trap it within flesh and blood body? Gendo had sought her out for her connections to Seal, but it was she who decided to betray them. Armisael above began to furiously spin its helix. Hostile light bore down and splashed against a monstrous AT field. The angel didn't let up. Instead it compressed the beam and pulsed even quicker, like it was screaming die, 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 die with every flare, until finally a pencil-thin beam broke through. Ikari skipped lightly to the side, the beam singeing the edge of her coat. Her left eyebrow twitched in fascination. Her fingers twitched, and there was a sound not unlike that of a piano key. Yu lifted her hand to her face. Delighted, she wriggled her fingers. The sounds formed by the interaction of the AT field she now controlled took on a more musical timbre. Yu shifted the position of her hand up and down, held out and to the sides. She stretched out, exulting as her muscles strained and sliced up with her open palm. There was a sound not unlike a harp string being cut, and in the air rang with a scream. Armisael staggered in mid-air, unravelling, cut straight through. Its strands leaked thick red blood as it crashed onto the buildings. It continued to break apart into glowing strings, which darkened and dissolved into thick red ichor. Dead! Ikari resumed experimenting, on her face a look of delighted inquiry. Tall buildings began tumbling down around her, with every gesture cut straight through their metal support beams, with every gesture a perfect note on the most perfect piano. Down below, Ritsuko Akagi slumped defeated on her seat.
So, this is how the world ends, she whispered, to the strains of Fur Release.
Ray felt herself being picked up by the back of the neck, weak as a kitten.
We were wrong, she thought. People are separate because being together brings pain. That which cuts through the AT field is what we call the spear.
Lilith's own lance, the trigger of evolution. The grip began to tighten and she couldn't breathe. Ayanami! Shinji's panicked cry pulled her back from the abyss. From her peripheral vision she saw him attempt to leap to help, only to fall to his chin as he was tackled from behind by his Section 2 bodyguards. Damn it, Ikari! Agent Kentaro whispered fiercely and with regret. Remember, you're the trigger for third impact now! The blood from Armisael's stringy-let gargantuan corpse was starting to flood the edges of the avenue. I won't sacrifice Ayanami. Not again! The boy blubbered, desperately and in futility reaching out with his right hand. Fear and hate and shame bubbled through his veins, for he knew that this, too, was likely his fault. Yu turned to look at him while still effortlessly holding up Ray by the neck with one arm. She tried to speak, but there were no words. A metallic shriek was all she could make. Though she might wear the shape of a human, the region of space she occupied might as well have been a different universe in itself, a singularity in a soul. The plaintive twang of strings seemed to croon. It's going to be fine. Yu turned back to Ray and gripped the girl's neck with both hands. It's all going to plan. I'm going to fix everything, you see. There was a loud crack and Yu's head snapped back. A crumpled dart fell from her cheek. It had a tungsten carbide penetrator head with a psychoplastic material core. Yu looked annoyed. Within the 5th floor of a car park several blocks over, a Unix sniper shivered with sudden maddening fear. His eyes met her through the scope and he opened his mouth to scream. There was an explosion of blood and an empty uniform and an anti-material rifle slapped onto the garage floor. Slowly, the tactical dreadnoughts of the Legio Terminatus and a few weary Psycana shuffled back into the street. Lama Pagnor's armour was dented inwards. Many of his comrades had not fared so well, devoured by Lilith's presence, or had their bodies crushed by debris. Faith and willpower hadn't served as well as thick layers of armour. They couldn't attack, fearing that Yu would use Ray as a human shield. They looked to the anguished plea on their employer's face, and saw that the boy had nothing yet left. He'd met the foe he couldn't defeat through raw insanity. He was still pinned to the ground, his chin to the road surface. He wouldn't be able to let go of love and pride. Never again. Not to Ayanami. Yu looked to Shinji, then to Ray, and tilted her head enough as if to ask, Is this enough for you? Lilith was a beast out of the primordial chaos. You understood the human yearnings that beat within the young girl's heart. It was loyalty. Wasn't it just the transactions of emotions? Ayanami was being loved as payment for her power. She'd never stopped being a tool. Anger flashed across Ray's face. Her lips curled up in a slight snarl. Of course it was enough. She was replaceable. Soryu could become a mother. She existed only to die for him. Ray now valued herself, but because of that she could also offer herself. There could be no sacrifice worth having worth. Pride and delight spread across Yuakari's features. Gratefulness shone in her eyes.
You have done well,
she mouthed out. The girl had fulfilled her purpose to the utmost. The tool had served very well until the time the project could be completed. And now the tool must be put down, so that the hand could be free to grasp new things, to reach for new heights. You squeezed. And squeezed. Someone was screaming. There was a squelching noise and a crack. So Soryu wins after all, was the thought. It was pleasant anyway. Knowing love and friendship, no one could take that away from her. Rei Ayanami's body fell limp onto the blood-slicked road. Her head went another way. Shinji screamed and screamed until his throat cracked. The street lit up in fire. Autocannons and storm bolters blazed away. The shots struck and sparked off Yu, standing there casually with her hands in her pockets, all futile as shooting Superman. She still had that sad, yet satisfied smile. As long as Ayanami existed, there was the possibility of Lilith leaking out. She blinked and put a hand to the sides of her face. Strange. Was she weeping? Ayanami's soul was more beautiful than she'd expected. She looked at Shinji, still cowering in despair, and met Agent Kentaro's eyes. The older agent had removed his sunglasses, and his weary expression seemed to ask, why? He'd been an acquaintance of Yu even back when Nerve was still Gehun. Part of her bodyguard detail, in fact. He got his answer, but to no avail. Agent Jiro twitched horrified as blood splattered over his back, and sunglasses fell to break near sensible black leather shoes. Down below, the clones in the tank began screaming, even through their drugged, mindless state. Armisael's blood was now a thick red tide through the street, carrying loose debris with it. Shinji's body jackknifed about uncontrollably, the wild flailing of his limbs forcing him out of Agent Jiro's shocked hold. The boy curled into a fetal position, shaking. Perhaps he should have been more careful about constantly declaring Rei to be the other half of his soul. It seemed the universe perversely paid attention to things like that. The boy's shaking subsided, his sorrow not at all. Shame at his weakness, hatred at being unable to prevent it, and even more self-loathing at the sight of him that reminded him to just get up and move on. She would never have held him at fort, and would have wanted him to use her death to serve his purposes. The war needed to be fought. But he'd never realised before just how much he relied. How he needed that pure faith. He'd almost feared he would prove unworthy of it. Rei was gone. That was his new reality. He didn't want it to be real. He wasn't as ruthless as he'd imagined himself to be. Fighting in an Ava, no matter how gruesome, somehow there was still a facile veneer to it that he could somehow deny the worst-case scenario. Burnt, crushed, decapitated, a god machine was still a flesh puppet. The entry plugs were located in a place hard to target and hard to damage. He'd used improbable battle to feel alive. He felt dead inside. Everything in his mind fled. He was beyond terror. He suddenly was drained of hate, of stubborn self-importance. He shakily crawled on all fours like an animal towards Rei's corpse. The white of his plug suit was being stained red. And another part of him whispered scathingly, "Bet you wish you had some sort of superpowered evil side now, huh?" He reached out and plucked Rei's head as the angel blood drained towards the lake brought it closer. "Ayanami!" Her face in death was peaceful as ever. She had no regrets. Ayanami! Shinji sobbed and embraced his beloved's decapitated head, cradling it to his chest. He remained there, bent over and in tears, even as others around him continued to fight and die. Their mistake was thinking that, because psychoreactive material could erode AT fields, was all they would work against all angels, even Lilith. Except, as it turned out, all that the psychoactivity throughout humanity was to build Lilith's own lance. It was inevitable. It was the flowering. Humanity was one fractured being, and that being was the next generation of the Lilith life form.
Get him out of here!
Lama Pagnor roared to Agent Giro as he and the Custodes tried to force back whatever this abomination wearing a dead woman's body was. He put 2 fingers to his temple and then pointed. Lightning flashed out from his fingertips. Yu stepped back. Good, he thought. If it, didn't want to get hit by a psychic attack, then there might still be something they could do. His combat focus was powerful, but the other masters had other esoteric methods. He looked aside for a moment to check, and saw that Agent Jiro and the reporter were dragging an insensate Shinji away from the fighting. He turned back and saw Yu Akari was already at his face. Her face was solemn. She held up a slim finger and touched the hollow of his throat. Then she was ripping him open in one easy flick from neck to groin. Blood and viscera poured out of torn composite armour. The Legio Terminators were falling back as fast as they were able. There was another roar and a bright flash, and steel rained from the skies as an artillery strike landed right over their previous position. Corpses left on the battlefield, including Pagnor and Ayanami, were torn to unrecognisable shreds. Yu Akari walked out of the hailstorm, dusting off flesh of metal ash from her lab coat. She sneezed a small cute "Hiku!" and rubbed at her nose with her palms together, as if praying. Inside the geofront, Kaji popped back into the conferencing window.
Katsuragi, I'm going to order that all UN assets launch all their strategic assets now. Any objections?
No, Masato said, suddenly so very tired. Ritsuko? Heading down to self-destruct the Magi now. She closed her eyes and only saw Yu Akari's triumphant expression. We have to face it. We've lost.
All right. We all die in 10 minutes.
Kaji looked aside and gave a hesitant grin.
Those words I couldn't say before. I suppose they won't be a comfort now. But let me just say, it's been real, Katsuragi.
Yeah. Goodbye, Kaji. In the Sea of Japan and just outside Sagami Bay, submarines surfaced and hatches opened. Many of the boomers could have fired off safely from underwater, but here, independently from each other, they decided that for this, they wouldn't hide like sellswords in the night. From the waters rose pillars of flame. From the mainland, atomic arrows shot out. Half a world away, decades-old silos opened, and for the first time fired in anger. The UN had a preset staggered launch schedule, timed that the first wave would strike at the sufficient delay that the missiles wouldn't uselessly spend their fury in fratricidal detonations. The next wave would arrive 5 minutes later, and the ICBMs would rain down continuously 5 minutes after that. The flying Castle Sturmbrand was still nowhere to be found. Not in the sky. Not anywhere on Earth.